Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and my friends from Bangalore. Today, we're going to do another bakery session, and we're going to be talking about the four kinds of pastries and all those pastries that you've been hearing since your childhood: the red velvets, the chocolate truffles, the black forests, pineapples. Those are basically not pastries; they are basically cake slices. And but that's the normal terminology being used these days. So that's pretty okay as well. But traditionally speaking, there are four kinds of pastry in the French culinary world. Though if you Google it today, then you will find something like a filo pastry, which is basically a type of puff pastry being given a separate place for itself. And something I was pretty surprised to find samosa pastry, the dough that we use for making a samosa, making its mark over there. But if you open the culinary books, if you open the traditional, the ancient culinary books, or for that matter, Escoffier, you will find that there are four types of pastry, and they are short crust pastry. I'm going to write it for you here. I'm going to be using this chat box pretty often, so you guys can take notes here. So we have the short crust, also known as sweet short, also known as sweet crust, known as English pastry. So remember, this is the only pastry which has multiple names, followed by something called a puff pastry, something followed by a Danish pastry, and lastly we have something known as Choux pastry. So these are the kinds of pastries that you need to be familiar during your year one at IIHM, and I'm sure that most of you must have made most of these things by now. But a quick theoretical revision is not bad, I would say. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to start with short crust pastry, and you need to remember one ratio here. One is that's the ratio for short crust that you need to know. 1:2:3, and this is usually what we're going to say. Sugar is to fat is to flour. 1:2:3 is sugar is to fat is to flour. The fat is always in the middle. Remember that. Like even if you take a fat person, for example, I mean, so the fat is always around the belly. The belly is in the middle, so the fat is going to be in the middle. And to reduce fat, I mean, to lose fat, you need to reduce the sugar in your diet. So that is one part. And what we are left here is with flour. So 1:2:3 is usually your sugar is to your fat is to your flour. And I'm going to be talking about the methodologies. Remember, for the first 3 or 4 steps, it is common. Okay, after that, I'm going to bifurcate into 2 steps. One is for making cookies, and the other is for making tart shells or pie shells. Okay, so you need to remember that. And another thing, guys, I'm sorry I forgot to mention that at the beginning of the session, the last 10 to 15 minutes, I'm usually going to keep for the question and answers. So if you guys have any questions, you can kindly type it in the chat box, and you can just hit enter and leave it there, and we'll address it in the last 10 to 15 minutes. And please do ask questions. It means that you guys are not sleeping through my sessions. Like it's very easy to check if somebody's feeling sleepy when you're face to face, but here it's pretty difficult. So I would really appreciate if you guys ask questions, and I'll try to take up most of them and answer them. Thanks for the time constraint. So what we're going to do is I'm going to tell you the methodology, and like first 3-4 steps are common. After that, it gets bifurcated into cookies, and the other is for making tart shells or pie shells. Okay, so short crust basically is if you've been to your CCDs or your baristas and all that, those coffee shops, and you had let's say a chocolate tart or a chocolate pie, or an apple pie or an apple tart. The biscuit base that you see around it is the short crust that we're going to be talking about today. Okay, so the first process here is called crumbling. I'm going to explain all of them really very quickly, and then I'm going to just so sorry. We'll start with crumbling. So I think I should be able to write this message out. So sorry. So the first process is where you cream the fat and sugar together. Followed, I'm going to explain them. I'm just trying to write it because you guys might hear something else, write something else. So, then staying, then you got rolling, and after this, so it's common filter. What we do here is that the first process you see is called creaming. What you'll do is please ensure that your fat, which is usually butter, is at room temperature. And if you guys remember my first class, I'm going to make this again with my hands. And first, you ensure that your butter is at room temperature so that when you start creaming it, there aren't enough lumps. Otherwise, you need to take more time. Guys, it's not a good idea to take your butter to a microwave or an oven or the gas range for that matter. And please don't try to melt it. Remember, the objective here is to get a creamy part. We're not trying to get a liquid part, or we obviously don't need a solid part. It's somewhere in the middle. So once what happens is that once we heat it, there is always a chance of clarification, and we don't want that to happen. Secondly, the chances are that the butter, once it's heated and you add your sugar to it, while creaming, there is every chance that you will crystallize your sugar, which we don't want that. Okay, which we don't want to happen. So please remember, we will just ensure that our butter is at room temperature, and there is a lot of warmth, the body temperature, that is going to help your cause. And if you're using a machine for that matter, so don't worry, that's pretty simple as well, because what happens in a machine is that once the blade of the planetary mixer is moving, it's going to create a lot of heat. Okay, so that is going to help your cause. So please don't expose your butter, don't expose your fat to any sort of microwave or anything. Okay, so you start creaming it, you'll realize that it's becoming fluffy. When you feel that there are no lumps in it, that's the right time to add your sugar into it and continue creaming. Okay, here what you see is that your butter has started to lose a little bit of color because it's going to acquire the characteristics of the sugar as well. And what is going to happen here is that the color is going to be somewhere between off-white and pale yellow. Okay, so not exactly pale yellow, not exactly off-white, somewhere in the middle. You'll realize that it's become very, very fluffy, and that's what we are trying to create. Not exactly like dalgona coffee, but still, it's going to be really very fluffy as compared to what you started with. Then comes the next process, which is called crumbling, where you add your flours. Suppose you're making something with a chocolate crust, you can add your cocoa powder here, or custard base, you can add your custard powder here, and then you just do it like this. You just mix it with the creamed sugar and fat, and you just crumble all your stuff. You'll see that crumbs are being formed, and then you'll combine, and then you'll make a very nice smooth ball out of this. Remember, if the ball that you're making is very crumbly, then there is a possibility that you've gone wrong with your ratio and your flour is too much or your fat is less. Okay, and if you think it's shining a lot and it's the butter is just seeping out, then obviously it means that your butter is more and your flour is less. So bakery, as I said in my last session, if you guys remember, bakery is all about measurements, passion, and using the correct equipment. Okay, the rest everything is very simple. I mean, like in the hot kitchen, we say if you learn to control the heat, the rest everything is fairly very simple. Similarly, if you will try to understand that how we're doing the measurements in bakery, then your life is going to be very simple after that. Now what happens is that once we are sure that our crumbling is fine and we made that ball, so what we're going to do is that we're going to keep that inside the refrigerator for about 30 to 35 minutes. Mind you, in reality we require resting of at least 6 to 8 hours and overnight resting, but in an institute scenario it is just not possible. So the difference here is that I'm sure that most of you must have made shortcrust you would have used your hands for shaping and molding. Like the thumb can be a brilliant thing when doing it for a tart mold, for that matter. It's not very easy to use a rolling pin or a dough sheeter. Okay, so that is the flip side of not resting it for a while. Another difference, as I said in the last class, please, this is not proofing. Don't confuse this with proofing. This is resting. There is no reaction happening here. It's just that the butter and everything there, the flour and sugar, they are just acclimatizing to each other, and they are just what you say is that they are becoming more set. So there is just no chemical reaction, unlike proofing happening there. There is no carbon dioxide produced. There is nothing of that sort. So please don't confuse between proofing and resting. There is a lot of difference between the two. Okay, a lot of you tend to do that, but if you know that what's the logic behind it, then I'm sure that you will not be confusing it a lot. So once our resting is done, we are going to roll it, and then we bifurcate into two parts. The first part, okay, first part, let's say, is to make cookies. Okay. So to make cookies, after the rolling part, what we're going to do is that we are going to do the cutting and shaping. We can use cookie cutters here. Okay. We can use cookie cutters here, and we'll cut it into shapes. We got a process called scoring, okay, followed by baking and finally resting. So I'm going to explain these to you. Use a cookie cutter, okay, and you will cut it into different shapes. If you don't have a cookie cutter, you can use a knife to make squares or rectangles, or you can basically use a scraper, the one that we use to clean the surface, or to scrape stuff off trays in the bakery. You can use a scraper as well. It works wonderfully well. So you can use a scraper, you can do the cutting and shaping, and then after that comes a process called scoring. So scoring, ladies and gentlemen, it is nothing but you give incisions on top of the cookie to give it a nice aesthetic appeal and all that. You can do that while making pies as well. For when you're making a shepherd's pie, for example, or an apple pie which is covered from top, you can definitely do that. So in scoring, has no scientific relevance. It is just there to give to improve the physical appearance and to give to improve the look of the product. So there is no scientific relevance to that. Even if you don't score your cookie, you're not going to make much of a difference there. So the important point to note is that suppose if you're making, let's say, I think a 250-gram flour product will give you about 20 to 25 pieces of cookies. So what you need to be very careful here is that all your cookies should be similar in size, in thickness. They have to be very similar. If it's too thin, and let's say one cookie is very thin and the other one is very thick, so your end product will be, one of the cookies will be burnt and the other will be undercooked. So we obviously don't want that. So should be uniform. It takes about 14 to 15 oven minutes at 180 degrees Celsius. Both the elements of the oven are firing at similar temperatures. Again, if you're trying to make cookies at home, I would suggest that in your OTGs, you reduce the temperature by about 20 degrees Celsius, and you please use the middle compartment, the middle section for keeping your tray. Don't keep it on top. Don't keep it at bottom. Keep it in the middle. Reduce the temperature by about 20 degrees Celsius, and you'll be good to go. Okay, because the ovens at home are usually not very accurate. Okay, that that's a that's a problem we faced. And I remember in 2016, and when we were finalizing ovens for YCO, and I remember I had to try at least 15 to 20 different brands before we zeroed down to the Morphy Richards RC52 that we currently use during YCO and India. And I remember that was a nightmare, because it was very difficult to call up people and say that, okay, I want an oven to test for a couple of days. I mean, I remember we actually bought 4 or 5 ovens, which we decided that we're not going to use this before we zeroed down on this. And Chef Kako is also there, I remember. So it is very important to make a good investment in a good oven. This is a very beautiful piece. I think for home cooking, it is one of the best products available in that price, and if you are a keen baker, you should definitely go for it. So after the baking, we coming on to resting. Now resting here is very important. What happens here is that once your product comes out of the oven, it is still hot from within. It is still cooking a little bit from inside, but it's also going to be very crumbly the moment it comes out. So if you try to pick it up, you're going to break it. And so the best way to do is you leave it for a while. It becomes more crispy. Like you must have seen. I mean, I'm sure that you've all made cookies or tarts so far. That when it comes out of the oven, it's really very crumbly and all that. And with time, it settles down, and it really becomes very crispy after that. So I think that's the right time to use it. And coming on to the second part that I was. Okay, so this is for making shells, charts. So second part, to make shells, they can be tart shells or pie shells. And what we're going to do is that once we are done with the rolling, we are going to do the molding. All right. After the molding, we're going to do a process. After that, we're going to do a process called blind baking. Okay. And after blind baking, of course, we will do this thing. After that, filling. Reheating, and again resting, and voila, we're good to go. So the first things first, we're going to mold it. We're going to use our hands because we've not rested our product enough. We're going to take let's say a pie shell, and we're going to just uh, fill it inside that to take that shape and all that. Now the most important part here is docking and blind baking. Now, these are terms that you guys must be familiar with because they can pop up in your interview questions. You're about a year and a half max to max away before your campus placements will start. So these are the terms that they basically ask: what is docking, what is blind baking, and there is every possibility that you might go blank at that time, and that's not a very good thing to do. So I hope that you guys are noting down these things. Okay. And what happens here in docking is that if you bought a pizza base, I mean, that's the easiest example I can give. Okay, though it's not related to Shortcrust, but the process is pretty similar. If you've got a pizza base from the market to make pizzas at home, so you will see those holes in it. Okay, like made with a fork and all, 4 holes, and multiple on the pizza base. So we do similar thing on the cookie, or sorry, on the tart shell or the pie shell, and we use a device called Docker, Docker. And what happens is that it just works like a like a like a pizza slicer, okay, like a pizza cutter, and you just roll it like this, and it is going to make holes on that on the pie and all that. It's really recommended for huge pies, but suppose if you're making very small, what do you say, tart shells or something like that, then you can use a fork as well. Okay, so what happens here is that, remember, when you apply heat to it, what happens is, the first of all, as I said, the elements get fired, they heat up the hearth of the oven, which will heat up your mold and which will heat up your product. So there is going to be heat produced, and when heat is produced, you will also have some steam which is produced. So that steam needs to escape. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, what happens is that when that steam will not find its space, it's going to create space. Okay. So there is every possibility that your product will rise. And remember, what I wrote a little up there is that we're trying to make a shell in which we are going to do filling. So obviously, we don't want that cavity should be filled. So what happens here is that we make those holes, and we tell the heat that, okay, I'm giving you space. You need to escape from here, and you're not going to damage my product. Okay, you start talking to your product. I mean, I told you guys in the last time also, it's a very good idea to talk to your products, especially in the bakery. You might look a little insane to others, but I'm sure your products will speak for itself. You need to be really very passionate in the bakery. So what you're going to do is, when you make those holes, you tell the steam that, okay, you tell the heat that this is the gate that I'm giving you to escape. You're not going to mess up my product, and that is the process which is known as docking. After docking, we do a process called blind baking. You all must be wondering, once we've made those holes, okay, so why are we doing blind baking? Because in blind baking, what we do is we take kidney beans or Bengal gram, any hard shelled pulse for that matter, and we keep it on top, or in the cavity of our product, to ensure that it doesn't rise and we get our cavity. So what happens there? Sorry. Yeah. So what really happens there is that despite giving holes, there is every possibility that since it's a huge, it could be a huge pie, that it could rise from somewhere or the other. Or suppose if there is something wrong with your ratio, suppose the 1 to 3 ratio that I've been talking about, suppose if it's not proper, then there is every possibility that as soon as heat is applied, that gap, that hole is going to get filled. That is going to ruin your product. So blind baking is like an insurance that you do to ensure that your product doesn't rise. Okay, and it's pretty simple. You just need to keep some beans on it, your baking beans on it, and once it's baked, you can just simply remove it. Okay, I usually keep it in cloth bags. Okay, the muslin cloth, I make small bags and I tie my baking beans in that. And as soon, as I put it on top of my stuff, and as soon as it is out, I remove that muslin cloth. Okay, you can use foil. I've seen a lot of people using plastic. They use cling film for that, which is absolutely a pathetic idea. And you should not do that. If you've seen anybody doing that, please tell them that it's not good for health. Muslin cloth is way safer. Okay, and it's not harmful at all. It's just a cloth. It's just that you need to ensure that your cloth doesn't get too dirty. Okay, so that's the reason that we do blind baking, to ensure that a product doesn't rise. So remember, there are 3 keywords that come out of Shortcrust pastry. One is scoring, one is blind baking, one is docking. Okay, and they are equally important. So after the blind baking is done, we remove our kidney beans, and we can do the filling. Suppose if you're making a chocolate tart, it won't require baking again. But suppose if we are making an apple pie, we might rebake it. If we are making a quiche, we might consider baking it again. Also, since most of you will go to your ITs once the lockdown is over and all that, so you might see that, especially while making quiches, a lot of places, what they do is they make the short crust, they put the quiche mix, and they do one single baking. Now that is also acceptable. I mean, it happens in the industry, though it may not be the right way of doing it. But time is money, and that's something that I've seen happening in the industry. Though I still feel that the difference in the product speaks for itself, and you should definitely follow the correct methodology and all. Okay, so that is more or less after that. After your double baking, you will just give it again some little resting, and then you can cut, and then it's ready to serve. Remember, you can do scoring as well. Suppose you're making an apple pie, you want to do a little bit of scoring, go ahead. You want to give it a lattice, go ahead. You can use a little bit of puff pastry. I mean, to give a nice lattice on an apple pie. It really looks wonderful, or a cherry pie for that matter. Not very common in our country, and not very popular as well. But if you go to the English countryside and all that, and you'll see that that's really very popular there. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is more or less I wanted to talk about short crust pastry. And I'm going to move on to my second kind of pastry from here, which is called as the puff pastry. Now, that's I don't know about much about Bangalore. I just been there once when I was a child. I was going to Ooty, I believe. So I went to Bangalore, Mysore, and all these places. I mean, maybe 20 years back. So I don't remember much about Bangalore. It's been ages since I come there, but I'll tell you a little bit about Delhi. That the normal patties that we eat, I mean, the puffs, the aloo patties, the paneer patties, and all that. Basically, they are not patties; they are puffs. That is the most common use of puff pastry, if you ask me. Okay, I don't know what you guys call that in Bangalore. I mean, I hope that it's pretty similar, but ours is a diverse country with different terminologies for different parts of the world. But in Delhi, uh, we can. Okay, I have a question from Sarthak. I'll take it up. He says, "Can you explain blind baking, why it is done?" Yeah, Sarthak, I'll explain it again. See what happens. I hope you've understood what is docking. Okay, and in docking, what happens is that we've made those holes which allows the heat to escape, which will ensure that our product doesn't rise. Okay, suppose I will give you. I'll show you something. Like suppose this is my product, and I've kept it in the oven, and it can rise. It can from this it will become this. But what happens if I keep a little weight on it? Okay, now this weight will not allow, okay, my product to rise. So what happens here is that despite doing docking, there is a possibility that the holes might get filled up. So what we do is we keep kidney beans, which is rajma, or Bengal gram, which is kala chana, uh, maybe wrapped in a muslin cloth or straight away just like that, or you can keep a silver foil and then on top of it. So what will happen is that when you keep that weight on top of it, it will not allow the product to rise. See, the heat has to escape. It will find its way from the edges. Okay, and that is good for us. That will help us in demolding it, isn't it? So that is basically the process of blind baking. Okay, there are two aspects to it. First, you're applying weight, and second is that you're baking a blank tart. Okay, that's why it's called blind baking. Remember the two very important aspects to it. You apply weight to ensure that your product doesn't rise, and second is that you basically bake a blank pie. Like you're making a shell out of it, you're making a tart shell or pie shell. I hope I've been able to answer your questions, Arthur. And what we're going to do is we're going to move to a puff pastry. Puff pastry is the simplest of all. It's not going to take a lot of time to discuss that. In fact, the next three pastries are not going to take a lot of time. It's just that the short crust is really very essential. And if you ask me, that's really very important to understand because you know the other puff pastries and all that are Danish pastries are pretty similar as far as the theory part is concerned. Okay, though short crust theoretically is the longest, but it takes the minimum effort while you're making it. It's the simplest to make basically, but you see all those technical terms cropping up. They basically happen in short crust. Okay, so Michael has a question. Baking cookies in an OTG, what temperature can be used to prevent it from getting burnt or stuck to the pan? Michael, I've answered your question earlier, but I'm going to answer it again. Please maintain your temperature at 160 degrees Celsius. Please ensure that they are not very thick or very thin, optimum size, and please use the middle compartment in the OTG, and I'm sure you'll have a fantastic product. Okay, and if you think that your OTG is not firing at a good temperature, at a proper temperature, then you might have to make some adjustments. But if your OTG is firing at the right temperature, then I think 160 degrees is a good temperature to bake cookies in an OTG. Remember, when we come back to classrooms, in our ovens, we are going to bake it at 180 degrees Celsius. Okay. Okay, coming on to puff pastry, ladies and gentlemen. uh, very basic, simple products. We need flour. Uh, we need uh, we need chilled water. We need fat, and we need salt only if the fat is salted. Okay. So, most welcome, Michael. So, what happens here is that we need flour, chilled water, fat for lamination, and we need salt only if the fat is unsalted. See, if I have my way, I would always use butter to make puffs because you know they might not rise a lot, but they will rise just enough to show you the layers, and the taste is going to be out of this world. But unfortunately or fortunately, you know, we work in a world of cost control, and most of the bakeries, even 5 stars for that matter, unless and until they are using the puff as a base product for one of the things in their fine restaurants, for the coffee shops and all, they've all moved to margarines. There is a brand called Lily Light. I'm sure that it should be there in Bangalore also, because you know I could find that in Ahmedabad. So I think Bangalore will definitely have it. That is, Lily Light is a tailor-made margarine for puffs. It will give you wonderful rising, and it's an unsalted fat. So for every kg of dough, you will add about 20 grams of salt. Okay, but if you're using butter, which is salted, obviously we're not going to do that. So it's pretty similar for. So it's pretty simple to make it. The first you're kneading, okay, followed by your rolling, It tells me that it's there in Bangalore. Yeah, thank you. So rolling. After that, we are going to do our laminating. After laminating, we are going to do our resting. 3 minutes. Fridge. Rolling plus laminating. Resting. Explain it till here first. First, what we do is we take our flour and salt if it's there. If fat is of course unsalted, and with cold water. See, the reason we use cold water here is that first we're not activating any yeast, so we don't need lukewarm water, and the cold water is going to help your fat to remain inside. It's not going to. I mean, it will delay the melting process. It will basically help it to retain its shape and all inside once you're rolling. So what you're going to do is once you've rolled, after kneading, once you've rolled, you will divide your fat into three parts. You will use first part here, and you will basically do a laminating. Okay, it's like suppose after rolling, this is your product. Laminating is applying of your fat on top of it. Now this is the creaming method that I usually use, but there is a tourage method also that we usually teach in the second years. Okay, so wait for a little while, and let's hope we get back to classes soon. So what we do is once we've done that, we will just give it a nice fold like this, nice fold like this. Okay, then like like this, and this is just like a book cover fold. This is laminating. Okay, and what happens after laminating is that you're going to rest it in the refrigerator for about 30 minutes. Normal refrigerator will do. Deep freezer usually comes in when we're doing it for Danishes and all that. Okay, and after you've done your resting for 3 times, we are going to final rolling, cutting, filling, and shaping, and baking, and we are done. So what happens is after you give your final rolling, you can use a pizza cutter and you can put it. You can cut exactly good squares if you're trying to make a triangle puff. Okay, you can give it a lot of shapes. Actually, you can YouTube all that right now. Unfortunately, we can't show you that, but I'm sure you all must have made puffs. So once you do your cutting, you'll do your filling, whatever you're putting potatoes in there, mushrooms in there, chicken, cottage cheese, anything that you're doing. You'll give your shaping. Then you can give it an egg wash. Okay, the egg wash is really very essential here. It's going to give you a nice shine when it comes out of the oven. You can use a milk wash if you are a vegetarian and you're very particular about not using eggs. Okay, so you can give it a nice egg wash. You can bake it. Gets baked at a very high temperature. It's 20 degrees Celsius. Now, this high temperature is really very important, ladies and gentlemen. What happens is remember that you're not using any leavening or raising agent here, but despite that, we're going to have our layers open up. Remember two things. The first is when you're giving your rolling, you need to have very gentle hands. The rolling pin is really very heavy and it moves thanks to the way it's made on its own. So please don't put a lot of weight. It can do its job on its own. Don't put a lot of weight, because if you put a lot of weight, I'm sorry, so you're going to block the pores. While we are laminating, we are giving it a space to escape. So this is not like docking, but you're actually giving space for the heat to escape. So while you're laminating, so if you do it very in a very heavy way, if you use a very heavy hand, like bakers need to have very very gentle and soft hands. If you want to be a good baker, you really need to keep your heavy weighting to your gymnasiums, not in your bakeries. You need to have really very soft and gentle hands. So once you're done with rolling and all that, so what happens when heat is applied at 220 degrees Celsius, the steam is going to get formed and it's going to escape to through the laminations that we're giving, and that will make the product rise. So that's basically the science behind it. There is a lot of physics involved here, but please remember, please use very gentle hands. And puff pastry, after it comes out of the oven, basically doesn't require any resting, but it's not a good idea to put something so hot in your mouth straight away. So I mean, the puff really tastes amazing, like after 8 to 10 minutes out of coming out of after coming out of the oven. And if you're a baker, if you get addicted to eating stuff coming out of the oven like muffins or puffs, especially for that matter, trust me, you'll never go for that reheated stuff again in your life. And I hate it. I just can't stand a muffin, from a bakery counter which is microwaved. There is something different about a product coming straight away out of the oven. So that's, ladies and gentlemen, all about puff pastry that I wanted to explain. I'm going to move to my third pastry, French pastry. The most important product coming out of it is called croissants, announced as croissants. It's very important to understand that pronunciations are very important. What happens here is, Sarajit, I'm just coming to your question in a minute. Let me finish what I'm saying, okay? Or in fact, I'll answer it. Because you were asking, we need to have a cold environment while laminating. Of course, we need a very cold environment. We need to be working under air conditioners if possible, or if the climate is good. I believe that Bangalore is a little on the hotter side, but you need to have a very cold environment while laminating. That the room temperature should be maintained somewhere around 20 to 21 degrees Celsius. Okay, so yeah, the lamination for especially danishes and puffs, it really happens in the cold areas. Okay, yeah. So I was telling you about the pronunciations. It doesn't matter if you want to be a bakery guy or a kitchen guy. Suppose if you're working at the front desk and you have a guest walking in and he says, "Okay, do you serve nice croissants in your restaurant for breakfast?" And you don't know what's a croissant, and you're going to say, "No, we don't have that." But if somebody says, "And okay, you have croissants, right, or croissants, whatever way people call it," and you say, "Of course, yes, we have it." So you're basically turning away the customer. So it's very important to understand these little things, very important to understand these pronunciations. Okay, and since what happens is that Danish is basically a mixture of bread and puff making. Okay, if you know the methodologies of both, you will not go wrong. So talking about that, we start with, I've written it upstairs. Kutum, it's 220 degrees Celsius. If you can just scroll down a little, it's 220 degrees Celsius. I've written it also. Okay, so kneading, flying ferment, kneading, followed by rolling, laminating, testing, 30 laminating, testing, just like pretty similar. See, ideally these days making croissants or danishes with the tourage method a lot. In fact, we started teaching that to our first year students here in Delhi. I mean, we made croissants 2 or 3 times. So first time we showed them with this way, then we introduced them really very early this year as an experiment to making the tourage method instead of second year. So they both are exactly like similar methods, but not a good idea to explain it thanks to the time constraint. But even that is an acceptable format. That is the format which is being used these days a lot. There is something called a double baked croissant also, which is becoming very popular in our country, especially in Delhi. A double baked croissant is becoming very popular. So what happens is that, remember, there is, after my rolling, unlike in a bread, there is no proofing here. We just proof our croissant or our Danish only once. So you guys need to remember that we do that only once and we don't do it anywhere else. We just do single proofing after our cutting and shaping. So once we are done with this, we do a final pulling and cutting, filling if required. You do have filled croissants also, right? So filling if required, shaping, proofing. Okay, so after our final rolling, we're going to cut it again. We can use a pizza cutter. We make huge triangles to shape a croissant, then you just roll it just like that. And what happens is that you can do a little filling if required. You do have chocolate filled croissants, and you can fill it. So you can make a masala filling. You can make a cheese croissant. You can do anything basically. And then after that, of course, the rolling and the shaping, and then you do the proofing. I mean, it will be wonderful if you have a proofing chamber, but if you don't have, don't worry. So you can use the deck of your oven, which is not working, which has been switched off. And if you see what the florists use, those piss bottles for giving water, we use that for plum cakes also. Like after the cakes come out of the oven, we just sprinkle some old monk rum on that. So you can do that, or those fuss bottles. You need to give it basically a little bit of moisture. Okay, and also while baking, it is not a bad idea to just boil a lot of water. Keep a one by one pan inside next to the tray, and you put that boiling water, and you just you just close the lid of the oven. That's really going to be wonderful for your product. If you can if you can put a pan of boiling water along, or a pot of boiling water for that matter, while baking. Of course, you can give an egg wash before it goes in. You can also give an oil wash after it comes out, just like bread. And like bread, also it needs resting, okay, because it continues to cook from within. It's not a very, I mean, you do have freshly baked croissants, but freshly baked croissants really doesn't mean that it's just come out of the oven. But I would suggest that you give it a resting of at least 1 hour before you just start selling it or you start consuming it. Okay, so that's more or less all I wanted to talk about the three kinds of pastry. I'm going to move to my last, and if you ask me these days, the most exciting pastry, which is the choux pastry. The choux pastry, it's very simple to make if you ask me, and it's the only pastry that requires the intervention of a gas stove, or a cook stove top for that matter. And what really happens here is that your primary products that we use are butter, water, or eggs. Some recipes will have sugar going as well, powdered sugar, but let's stick to the traditional recipe. We basically don't add any sugar here. So what you're going to do here is, unlike other methodologies, this is very simple, and you need to really listen to me very carefully when I'm going to be talking about it, because I'm not going to be typing much over there when I'm going to talk about choux pastry. So what we're going to do here is that we're going to take butter and water, and we'll put it on a pan, and we'll start the heat. So what really happens here is that it will start to get heated up, the butter will melt, and the simmering will start. Remember, the moment the simmering starts, you will add your flour. Okay, don't allow it to boil, because if it boils, it's going to start evaporating, and that is something which you really don't want to happen. So the moment it starts simmering, you add in your flour and you cook it, okay, till the time the flour starts to leave the edges of the pan. So that's the time you take it off of the gas, okay, and you allow it to cool. Some people do put it in the refrigerator also, and that's totally acceptable. But at this stage, the product which we have is called a panada. Panada is used to make gnocchi, okay, which is a type of pasta. You remember these terms. The panada is not used in, like, of course it is used into making choux pastry, but it has a very good connection with gnocchis, which are a type of pasta. And what really happens after you've cooled down, you need to take cold eggs. You need to add your eggs one by one. Why you add your eggs one by one is because if you add a lot of eggs quickly, there is a possibility that it might, coagulate, or it might get scrambled up, and your product will get messed up. We really want a very smooth batter here. So we don't want any sort of lumps, any sort of scrambling or coagulating there. Like, the scrambling chances are more. But I just want you to understand that please use cold eggs. Whenever we are using eggs in bakery, we use cold eggs. We don't use hot eggs. Even, I mean, I remember I started my career as a breakfast chef many years back, and we used to take cold eggs for frying up eggs also, because the yolk would hold its shape, because you just really can't serve an egg with a yolk which has broken and it has mixed with the white. We just can't do that. So it was very imperative to use cold eggs. And similar to a buffet plate heater that you have, we used to have an egg cooler tray. I mean, if you'll remove one tray, the other tray on the bottom will come automatically, and that used to be refrigerated, so your eggs would remain cold. Now that is something that I've not seen in India so far, and I don't even know what it's called, what it is, because we have this exhibition in Ahar called Ahar in Pragati Maidan in Delhi every year, and I've never seen a manufacturer getting supplying something like that. But that is something that I saw and I used in the hotel where I worked. And it was we had a thumb rule that we used to put 10 trays of eggs, and once the last tray would get finished, we would put in the next 10. We would never like we would never fill it halfway down. Like suppose 5 trays are consumed, we will not put another 5 on top of that. So we would wait for the last egg to get consumed before we put in the next 10 trays. So yeah, I mean, I remember for a service of about 400 to 500 people, I mean, we used to use about 20, close to 15 to 20 trays of eggs every morning, serving about 500, 600 covers. So yeah, you can imagine life used to be fun. Life is fun right now also, but the industry is an exciting piece, no doubt. So once you've added your eggs, you can do two things to it. You can either fry it to make churros. Churros is a Mexican delicacy. It's a street food basically, or you can bake it to make things like eclairs or profiteroles. Guys, just about to finish in the next 3 4 minutes. I'd appreciate if you could put in some questions here. I've answered a few, just two, three, but I would really appreciate if you could just put in some questions here. Okay, so what happens is that once you've cooled it down, you've added your eggs to it. So you can just put it in a piping bag with a star nozzle, take it over hot oil, and just pipe it on that. Use a scissor to cut it like this. Okay, and then you can have churros. Once your churros are fried, you can take them out. You can toss it with some breakfast sugar and cinnamon powder, and you can have it with a nice caramel sauce, or you can have it with a nice chocolate sauce. I mean, what I would suggest is, since churros are served at room temperature, they are not really very hot. They should not be really very hot when they are served. So I would suggest that you serve it with a warm sauce. Okay, a lot of places make this mistake, that they serve really very hot churros, and that's why you will say that okay, it's raw from inside, but that's not the real way of serving churros. Churros have to be brought to room temperature. Basically speaking, technically speaking, since we all are bakery students here, that we are giving it resting so that it continues to cook from within. So if you eat churros straight away out of the pan, obviously it's going to be raw from within. You leave it for a while, it gets cooked. That's what we are trying to say when it comes to resting. It's very important to rest churros. Okay, serve it with a warm sauce and it's very good to go. And if you're trying to make eclairs or profiteroles, you can just on a silica mat or butter paper for that matter, or a tray, you can just pipe it in long cylinders like this big is good. I mean, I remember we used to make mini eclairs, which is the size of finger, uh, for uh, for our banqueting needs, and that used to be one hell of a ridiculous job to do, very irritating job to do actually, but that's how life is. But so once you baked your eclairs, they're baked at around 160 degrees Celsius. Okay, I'm going to write the temperature here, 160 degrees Celsius. Once they are rested, once they cool from within, you can slice it from the middle. You can pipe in some pastry cream. You can pipe in with some whipping cream, and you can dip the top in a ganache, or any fruit filling also for that matter. We're using a lot of white chocolate ganache these days, with some color dropped in. It's really become very popular. Like, if you know that eclairs, doesn't matter how easy they sound, trust me, they happen to be the most complicated pastry to make. And if you think you've aced an eclair along with the other pastries, of course, trust me, you can be a good baker. you have good prospect. But if you think you've tried 4, 5, 6 times and you can't get any eclair, then you need to work harder. Okay, so and in bakery, remember that don't get disheartened when you don't get your product for the first time. It really takes time sometimes. I mean, I allow my students to make mistakes. Yeah, croquembouche is definitely made using choux pastry rishi. It's basically profiteroles only, a little bit smaller than that, and that is basically you can do filling and you can make a mountain out of it, spun some sugar around it. So yeah, croquembouche is made using choux pastry. That's just another version of like using profiteroles, I would say. So do we have any more questions, ladies and gentlemen? That is all I wanted to talk about the four kinds of pastries today. Okay, so okay, I have a question coming in from Shreya. Shreya, that ratio is particularly about short crust only. The other places, the other pastries, sorry, don't use any ratios, but they do have specific recipes. Okay, like I mean, yeah, I can share the recipes with you later on. But the ratio is only confined to short crust pastry. Okay, so okay, so I don't think that we have any questions, Shreya. So we have some time. So what I'll do is, uh, we have 250 grams of 120 ml of milk, 60 grams of fat for lamination. Okay, 5 grams fat. What's the ratio? Share for puff. Sorry, the recipe. Danish. We start with sugar, and you can note it down, guys. These are the recipes that I'm giving you. 12 grams of yeast, 8 grams of sugar, and about 100 continued. So we'll take 250 grams of flour, grams of butter, 1 egg, optional, 50 grams of powdered sugar, not icing. Okay, icing. 10 grams of butter, 1 egg optional, 40 grams of powdered sugar. Yeah, that's about it. You can add 2 grams of baking powder, 2 grams of 150 grams of butter, sorted for lamination. I have a couple of questions before I tell you about the third pastry. Rishi asks, is there any difference in texture if you use butter for a puff pastry instead of margarine? Of course, there is a slight difference in your texture and everything. I think your pastry shines more with a with butter in it, and it is more crispy. If you ask me, with butter, it's very soft and a little soggy. With margarine, it really melts in your mouth. The margarine will stick to your tongue, to your jawline, and all that. But butter on the other hand is going to be really very smooth. So yeah, there is a lot of difference in with a for making a puff pastry with butter or margarine. Like for YCO, we use puff pastry as a base for one of the dishes that we made, and we simply use butter. We did not go for margarine for YCO. Okay, Alina has a question: for how long do we bake the eclairs or profiteroles? Good, good 20 minutes, I would say, Alina. 20 to 25 minutes. Okay, and you just need to check it. You need to just lift it and see if you see some brown coloring happen at the base, then it's good to go. Okay, so I'm left with choux pastry recipe. Choux pastry, 65 grams of butter, 65 grams of water. Mind you, this is grams, ml. Need to measure. Okay, a lot of people make mistakes here. Okay, and we use 120 grams of flour, 3 cold eggs, okay, so choux pastry, 65 grams butter, 65 grams water, equal quantities, 120 grams of flour, and 2 cold eggs used one by one. So that's all the recipes that I've given you. The short crust, of course, follows the ratio, and there's nothing very scientific about it, just a little mathematical instead. So that's all I wanted to talk about today. I hope you guys have had a good session and you've enjoyed. I'm really very happy that we made some progress since last time. We have a lot of questions coming up. So until next time, you guys stay safe. Please stay indoors. So we know that the Honorable Prime Minister has extended this by about another 3 weeks, and let's hope that we are able to control this virus, and we are going to be back on our feet. We are a very practical driven industry, and especially IHM is more about practical. So we all know that we are dying, and we are eager to get back into our kitchens. So let's hope that happens soon. But until then, please stay indoors, please stay safe, and take care of your health, take care of people around you, and keep cooking, and keep sharing stuff. And until I see you next time, goodbye, guys.